All right, so this is Creelabelle Howard, and I'm here with Emily Stevens from Amar. Okay, so let's start off with just talking about how big of an issue this is in the Middle East.
All right.
Let's talk numbers.
So worldwide, there are 65 million people that have been forcibly displaced. So the word refugee means that someone's crossed a boundary, a border into a different country. But the number of actual displacees is a lot more than those who are actual legal refugees. So I'll talk about the displaced number because that's the huge world problem. So 65 million, that's the equivalent of everyone in the UK or everyone in Thailand that has been forcibly displaced from their homes. It's a huge problem. And if you look on a map where the displacement is coming from, it's highly localized to certain areas of the world. We have a lot of issues in Africa and a lot of issues in the Middle East. So for example, Syria, they've had a massive amount of people displaced within their own country, like a massive, I wish I had the percentage off the top of my head, but it's so much more than just a small percentage of their country population has been displaced and forced sometimes to places within their own country and sometimes actually as refugees into other countries. Locally, there are so if you take that number, 34,000 of those people are displaced every single day. And so that's a good understanding for people locally that that's the equivalent of Pleasant Grove. Every single day, Pleasant Grove is being forced somewhere else. And forced as in they didn't choose to migrate because there's better work opportunities, but forced because they had to flee literally with the clothes on their back. They were lucky, maybe a backpack. I mean, think about the benefit of a 72-hour kit and how lovely it would be if they would have had that to take with them, but oftentimes that's not the case. Ultimately, that brings down to 1 out of every 113 people in this world is unable to return to a safe living environment right now. And I think that's a huge number because every time we sit in an audience, think of how many of those people are in dire situations. And then, of course, 50% of those are children. And because this is a crisis that isn't easily fixed and is not easily resolved for those individual lives, it easily can take 10 plus years to get someone situated back into a healthy living state where they can contribute to society. And that oftentimes means that we have a lost generation. This has happened in the past. This is not a new thing, but there are lost people. And they lose their entire lives. And oftentimes they don't have their legal records with them. So they truly are, lost entities. Mm-hmm. So it's a huge world crisis.
Yeah. And you were saying that a lot of the refugees, these are educated people, but because they've lost their identity, they can't find a job.
Well, and they're transient. And think about the way that generally in the world we think about someone who's transient. Oh, you're moving along. Why would we want to invest in you in a career way? Yes, not all people who are being displaced have really stellar educations, but many of them do. Many of them are college educated. Many of them speak a second language. Many of them had very successful careers and homes and bank accounts and all of those things before they lost everything. Mm-hmm. The value of your home really disintegrates fast when a bomb hits it. Mm-hmm. And there's no property value anymore. So that's often a problem. And that's one of the big, huge problems with displacement and placement. When you're displaced and you're moving about, like you're living in a camp, and you don't know how long you're going to be in a camp. You don't know if you're going to be in the camp for just a couple of months or a couple of years. Mm-hmm. There isn't work opportunities close by. Oftentimes you're in the middle of nowhere. And you then take getting into a city, the same problem happens. Or if a city or a country gets an inundation of these displaced people, the economy maybe isn't prepared for that situation. A bigger problem is, for example, in Utah, we have 60,000 refugees, but oftentimes they come and they don't have the language yet, and so they couldn't be placed in opportunities with those educational backgrounds.
You have locals working in these camps, right?
Yes.
And they're helping these refugees. So how do you find these local people to help out?
So first off, a little bit of background about Amar. We work in Iraq, and we have been long time established in Iraq. This didn't start with the refugee crisis. So we already had an established structure where we have a regional manager that is a local Iraqi, and all of our employees in Iraq are local. And so that was a good step. Because we're working with people with the displacement crisis, most of the people we're helping are actually internally displaced people. So they haven't crossed that border. They're actually Iraqis who have been displaced in Iraq. There's 10% of the population has been displaced, so that's 3.3 million people, which is the equivalent of Utah and Wyoming being displaced. So to answer that question, I like to tell a story. When I was in Iraq last November, I was spending time in one of the IDP camps during the day, and at lunchtime they were worried about me actually eating food that could have been contaminated and not good for an American body. And so they sent us off to go find food in the city. So we drove into the city to get lunch, and we went to a local eating establishment, ate our lunch. When we were done, we wanted to pay for it, and they wouldn't take our payment. And we're like, wait, what's going on? Why? Like, no, we want to pay you. You just served us. And they said, no, we know who you're with. We know what you're doing. And I was really taken back. And they said, these are our people, and you are trying to help, and this is something we can do. Please have enjoyed your lunch. And that really struck me about the way the local people felt, because obviously, economically, that must have been a great burden to have so many people enter into this new area of the world, and they're in great distress. And where I was not that many miles away from the front. And so who knows when something terrible could happen to their own city. Another interesting thing is my translator during this trip was a young kid, maybe 19, out of high school level or secondary school, pre-college, and his older brother is our manager in this region. And I asked him, well, what are you doing? Like, is this your job? Are you getting paid? And he said, oh, no, but there's too much for my brother to do. There's too much for Zana, my brother, to do. And so I am helping him, because two can do more than one. And I was so overcome with basically this volunteer service, and he had given over a year of his life to do anything and everything. I mean, so he would drop his brother off to do whatever he needed to do and go and run all the errands that needed to happen for the cause, and then come back and pick him up, and then he was able to translate because his brother didn't speak English. And I thought it really was an impressive thing to me of how much people genuinely care. And I feel like the Iraqis are much like the Canadians. They have a lot of pride about their country. And it was this, we care. We want Iraq to be better. We want this to be a different situation. So as we find people to help, I have seen nothing but an outpouring of generosity. We had, when the original crisis happened in August of 2000 and, where are we at now? August of 2014, when the real crisis started to hit, we had staff members who would work all day, and they're doctors and medical professionals, and they would be on their feet with thousands and thousands and thousands of people going through. They wouldn't get a break. They haven't eaten. They haven't done anything. The second they were able to, they closed the health centers, they would rush to the local pharmacies and beg off any medical help they could get and go and serve other people that were displaced in the region. It had nothing to do with payment. It had nothing to do with what their personal benefit from this. There were people who took people into their own homes that had great medical needs and concerns, that took them under their wings, basically fostered some children. I feel like there was so much caring and outpouring, and I hope that kind of answers that question, that as we are trying to find people to help, we hire people, but a lot of what we do on the ground are volunteers, and they want to help their people, and we're giving them opportunities and a structure that's already built and developed and works well to do that.
And that is so great to hear, because with all that's on the news about the horrible things that are happening in the Middle East, and then also in France and other in European countries, there can form this prejudice against Middle Easterners, and yet it's amazing to hear that in the same country where so many horrible atrocities are happening, there is so much love and there's so many good things also happening as well.
This has really, really encouraged my perspective on the human spirit and on the love that people have, and that the media is very propaganda in so many ways. I know that, for example, Germany is overwhelmed. Of course they're overwhelmed. And you're going to have a lot of people who have language barriers and need work and are hungry, and there's things that happen that look atrocious. But overall, these are good people that if you gave them a job and employed them and allowed them to become a self-sufficient part of the society, they would, and they'd become a contributor. Refugees can offer so much economic growth for the places that they enter if it is handled correctly. And
transitioning then into the presidential election, we're whether or not to let refugees into this country is a really big issue, a really big concern. A lot of people are worried. They don't want to see what's happened in Europe to happen here. Yeah. And so Hillary Clinton has said that she wants to allow 65,000 refugees more into this country. So you were saying that would be about 10,000? Or about a little more than 10,000.
65 divided by 50 states is, a little over 10,000 per state.
Mm-hmm. But you think that that's manageable for?
I would think so. That it's much more manageable than going to a major war.
Right.
I believe that it is our responsibility as members of this world community to take in refugees. There may be a time in our lives where we need someone to take us in, and boy howdy, will we be grateful that someone allowed us to be, good karma. It goes a long way. I think it's really, really important. The problem with this scenario is that the same way that the 65 million worldwide, if they were distributed across all the countries in the world, it would be quite doable. It would be hard, but quite doable. But it is not being distributed in that way. And the same thing if 65,000 come to America in 1 year. I'm not sure what the actual stats is for America currently. This year, I think it's probably closer to 30,000. So it's doubling the amount that come in. It depends on if they're all going to all the states. I mean, if they're going to Texas and Utah and a few other states, that is a very heavy burden that I feel like could be very managed if there's the funding that goes behind that. Because it takes a process and time to get someone established into a new area. The first 6 months especially, there are stipends that are given to those families to help them get to the point where they have enough English to get into a better job and to get a vehicle and to be established. But it is hard. And it's I think that the most important thing we can do is open our borders, though, and that the security issue that everyone's so worried about is really quite uneducated. The vetting process is incredibly intense to get someone in. Bad guys will come, whether it be mafia or ISIS or whatever it is. Bad guys will come because they can work through any system. But they're not coming as refugees. Refugees are fleeing ISIS. They are fleeing these wars. They are not those that are causing problems. And generally they're bringing families. It's not like they're bringing just individuals of risk.
So what do you think is the best way to integrate these refugees into a different culture?
I think that what Utah is doing is actually very noble and impressive. There are a lot of organizations that are both state-funded and federally funded, as well as organizations that are from the business community. All of these things seem to be working together well. Obviously, there's English language acquisition, which is super important. It's getting them established into apartments. It's getting them placed into work. And oftentimes, as we spoke about before, if they could get placed into work where that's what their skill set is, they would be happier. As we get placed into crap jobs, we tend to feel crappy about life. If we're able to get into a job that we feel like we're thriving and growing, then you feel like you're contributing, especially if that job will help you pay your bills. It's really, really hard if we're getting them into minimum wage situations that make them feel stuck. I feel like what Utah is doing is really great. A lot of community people are helping get the equipment necessary to put them into their apartments. There's people who are volunteering to meet them at the airport and help those organizations welcome them and get them placed. We have families that help mentor for the first 6 months to a year that are helping them learn about what's going on, how to get, acclimated into this society and how the school system works and how the grocery system works and, medical system, because a lot of times they just don't realize. There are a lot of organizations like the IRC and Catholic Community Services, Utah Refugee Services that help educate them. They have classes. They have, I feel like there's everything that could be done in so many ways is done. The only missing link is helping them get placed into jobs. There are some companies in Utah that have been incredibly great examples of what you can do. Marriott Park City is one of them. They realized very quickly that refugees make incredible employees. Helpful employees. Actually, I think one of their main managers over Marriott Park City was a former refugee. He was placed, he started as a refugee, worked up the chain, and he's one of the managers. But they understood there's some limitations. Park City is not where the refugees are living. They're living in these areas in downtown. And so they created a shuttle system. They helped create a daycare. They realized, they have medical needs that they need to go to. They have to go to their appointments. And they created means and structures to help support them with what they had. And they have made for incredible employees. There's a few other businesses across the Wasatch Front that are similar. And if more organizations could buy into the value of hiring refugees, once you get over the language barrier, you have a really good situation. And as right now, most of the refugees are located in Salt Lake County because that's where they're able to place them with jobs. We now have 5 families that have moved down to Utah County. There's a lot more families that need to come. And as we can open up work opportunities and support opportunities, that's possible. So not all states are doing what we're doing. And refugees are often localized into certain cities. But again, if there's 65,000, as we can spread those out and they can have the community support and integration that they need, they can make friends, that changes things. Bill Holsterston is over United Way of Utah County, and he made the comment that there was this El Salvador family that migrated here. And he met with them. They had lived here for 8 years. They had never been in an American home. Ever.
Wow.
And no American had ever been in their home. And that is when we start creating problems. If they don't
feel like they're a part of the society.
If we don't invite them to picnics, if we don't invite them to activities, if we don't let them be part of our community, they become isolated, they could become bitter. I mean, the problem is if you create negative situations, one bad egg can cause great problems for the entire structure of bringing refugees in.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk
to
us. And I really do hope that things continue to work out. Amar continues to see success and things continue to improve. And hopefully we'll get to see more refugees being welcomed into this country and to other countries. And
Amen. I also hope that the Amar Foundation works really hard to help people go home and stay home. Rather than have to enter the refugee system.
Right.
And I sincerely hope that in some ways we can solve some of these problems enough that people can just go home and never have to be actual refugees that are, spend years of their lives trying to be reacclimated into a new society. But rather let people
that would
become
be
back
the best
established
scenario.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much.